Yeah, don't tell me, don't tell, to be vulgar. If we were, I hope to be friends, no? When somebody calls me professor, my answer is, Russell must know what? What did I do to you to insult me like that? Did I rape your mother in public or what? If now I have a name, Professor
well, we have to turn your video on. Let's get your video on.
Yeah, we need the video.
Sir.
Am I not on video? Am I? Start video. Fuck it. Why? In and out. Do you see my...
There we go.
Another vulgarity. Go. Do you see my cunt face now?
Yeah. Yes, if you could just... Can we see more of it? Do you mind lowering your...
Wait a minute. I will show like this, and now you should see my face. And now I followed Russell. I also have books behind me to pretend to be an intellectual. No, I mean...
Exactly.
No, but you, Russell, you look better, more intellectual,
I'm just...
Everything is covered with books behind you.
This is fake. It's just a backdrop. It's not real, so...
I know. I like that. But as I already told you, I had friends who have books, and they hired a student to just go through a book and in a totally contingent way sign somewhere, underline somewhere, write a remark so that it appears that these books are really read, Although, what is my dream? This is where we are intellectuals today. When we were young, we were pretend that you study, you have Hegel's logic, just a cover. Inside, it's pornography. Now, in today's world, you almost have to do the opposite, If you want to read Hegel's logic in peace, you have to put some cover of erotic adventures of a lady or whatever. Sorry, how do we begin? I heard before, all those, can you ask me? Screw you, you can ask whatever you want, not a problem for me.
Okay.
Like, maybe, but I don't want to monopolize the debate, my God. That's my only problem.
Well, I'm here to debate you on the issues. I think I'm not as bright as Jordan Peterson.
Nobody can measure up to Jordan Peterson.
I haven't read 1/10 of the Communist Manifesto, so I'm not equipped.
Do you think I have? I only wrote about it. I mean, you have to make a basic choice. Like recently, a New Statesman or Spectator published my polemics against 3 ongoing Black Widow, Nomadland, and so on. And I'm very critical towards these movies. And I haven't seen them, of course. I mean, I believe that a true Stalinist intellectual has the right and duty to write about films he didn't see. You know who is my mentor here? You know what Oscar Wilde said? When you are asked to write a review of a book, don't read that book. If you do, it may make your review partial, Don't read it. But now, stop joking. Maybe to tell something for our viewers that they may like. The French guy that I often quote, Pierre Bayard, Bayard, wrote, among other things, a wonderful book called How to Write About Books That You Haven't Read. And in a wonderful way, wait a minute, it's not a joke. Listen, I know relatively well the domain of Hegel studies, no? And guys who obviously know all of Hegel, they are afraid to miss something like, but I know Hegel says something slightly different there, it's another accent. They are usually the worst totally scholar without any idea interpretations. The best readings of Hegel are those partial one-sided. You take one aspect and you say, that's the crucial thing. I believe in productive force of partial one-sided approach. Okay, but please, David, first, screw democracy. Democracy only works if there is a leader. David, are you the leader?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Screw democracy. Here in the United States, looks like whatever democracy we had is in danger.
There's another problem. I'm also critical towards Biden, but some of the measures, economic especially, that he tried to impose were, seriously, I had to admit it through my clenched teeth, not so bad. It's serious money for ecology and so on and so on. So, yes, I agree with you. Democracy is in danger, but not only in the United States, and it's an ambiguous situation, because I claim precisely through this opposition to Trump and so on, we got, if nothing else, in the last 2 years, one of the results of the pandemic is that the word socialism is legitimized. Like, if you add democratic, blah, blah, and so on, you can use it. When you mentioned, sorry, can I just briefly develop this? Now I'm getting old-fashioned Hegelian Stalinist almost, but I don't know how it is in the States. In my country also, we Europeans are often arrogant towards the United States, For a long time, I thought, you are bad, but Canada is like all the best from United States combined with the best from Europe. Wait a minute, when I read now what they were doing in Canada, and I knew it already for years, I have some friends there, with what they were doing with those indigenous children in their community. I mean, it's absolute nightmare. It's absolute nightmare. So, and we Europeans also, like vaccination. Some journalists in Slovenia looked at the government office, the duty of which is to promote vaccination and to organize it and so on, and to around 50 people who work there. And he discovered that much less than half of them are vaccinated. Even those supposed to organize it are not doing. No, what I want to say is that it's a beautiful example. I like examples of where you link a very concrete problem, like do we have the right to oppose vaccination and so on, with a very abstract problem, like, some radical liberals on the left and on the right claim that to enforce vaccination is like non-democratic, against your human rights and so on and so on. But I think that here we should introduce Hegel's distinction, I will immediately explain it, between abstract and concrete freedom. For example, I think that concrete freedom, not in any mystical Hegelian sense, like freedom which means that actually you can act as a free being, is only possible against the background of accepting certain rules. For example, I want to be free to publicly say what I mean, to debate with friends. For this, we all need to accept the rules of language. Okay, we can try to change these rules, but not in the way political correctness did it, but because there is an ideology in language. But rules are literally the base of freedom. Every freedom is freedom to move freely within a certain regulated space. Like, I want to have the freedom to walk around the city. Yes, but I must suppose that people whom I will meet will be mostly decent people. They will be punished if they attack me and so on and so on. And in the same way, I think in my last published somewhere on the web, I forgot where, text, I took the example of this resistance to vaccination. I think this is an abstract freedom, because if you are not a paranoiac and claims that all the scientists are part of a plot who are lying, then of course, if you have to get vaccinated, in some abstract sense, of course, if you are not free to choose, this is limitation of your freedom. You have to do it. But isn't it that today, as far as we know from science and so on, you can actually be free? I can go out, talk with friends and so on, only if I am vaccinated. So this is a nice example of a formal unfreedom. You have to be vaccinated, which enables my actual freedom to communicate with others and so on and so on. That's why I quoted that wonderful saying about freedom and enlightenment by Immanuel Kant, who says the message of enlightened freedom is not don't obey, do whatever you want. No, it is do publicly whatever you want, but when there is a social agreement about basic rules, you have to obey. So think freely, but obey. And I think this is the lesson that we need to take today. It sounds a harsh lesson, but just think if this global warming will go on, will we not need even harsher limitations and so on? So I think, again, that what really matters is concrete freedom. Freedom which means under what conditions, rules, regulations, can I exercise my freedom of speech and so on and so on. You must have media, you must have a public space and so on and so on. So I think that that's the problem with, let's call it abstract liberalism. You know which example I like to use here? Here I'm I'm not anti-American. It's still my favorite country, just not all of the United States. You know, wouldn't it be nice to imagine United States in Latin America? Now this will be ugly towards all those in Trump land, like the combination of two Chile. You know, Chile is like a worm on the west side of Latin America. So let's say we have the west coast, and imagine another Chile on the east coast, and screw all that Trump land in the middle. That would have been my ideal United States. You know what I mean? No? So again, you know what we have to be aware? The same goes for our social space. Democracy, including free dialogue and so on, only works if all sides accept certain basic rules. These rules can be limiting. I'm the first one to say that till 10 years ago, maybe even a little bit less, the basic rules were determined by this bipolarity, no Republicans, Democrats. But that's why it worked. But what's happening today, when we get Trump and the liberal establishment, I don't think there is any reconciliation possible here. Somebody will have to win. You are, and we are also quickly catching up. We in Europe, we are already in some kind of ideological civil war. That if you speak with our opponents, there is simply no shared space where we can even reasonably argue. You know, that's why I think we are in a dangerous situation. Okay, but I talked too much. I'm sorry.
It does feel like we're in a dangerous situation. I'm going to ask you one question, then I'm going to ask Professor Anli to ask you a question, and then Professor Hussein, and then Professor Burgess. But
I like the man, sorry, Hussein. Is he an Arab terrorist who escaped here and was Ahmed, but then he quickly changed from Ahmed into Adrian to cover up his... Sorry. I cannot. You see, now I will not...
Is that what happened?
Now you've outed us, you know, as a cell, and you know, my cover is gone. This is really a disaster.
You got to fold up the operation now.
Exactly.
How are you doing? Is your uncle now some minister in Kabul of the new Talib government or whatever? No, we should talk also about Afghanistan, because I am so shocked by the attitude, I don't know if it's with you in the States, but in Europe, of leftist liberals. You know, some of them, even more or less openly, like my good friend Varoufakis, were nonetheless tempted to celebrate the fall of Kabul as big defeat of global imperialism, neocolonialism, and so on and so on. But it may shock you, but as a leftist, I'm saying it's not as simple as that. It's not only empirically that the scandalous way the United States withdrew, but I think that even in principle, United States intervened there. Yes, they screwed it up. After 20 years and spending $1 trillion, Taliban is stronger than ever there. But precisely for this reason, you ruined half of the country on the other side. We should be frank as leftists here, true leftists. Things that are happening there, women's liberation, it's a whole movement there. Even some type of civil society and so on and so on. Let's face it, this was an collateral effect, but nonetheless an effect of the American intervention there. And we should not be ashamed to say this, to simply withdraw. There were other options, like my Brazilian friend, Safatle Vladimir, with whom I had a debate. He said, what if there were other options? Like, what if United States were try to get some moderate Muslim countries, maybe Egyptians, Morocco, and so on, to send their soldiers there, so that you don't have this clear opposition, United States versus Taliban and so on. But I think the other thing that bothered me is that typical reaction of the West was now, where does of the liberal left in the West, where do they feel good? When you have victims and you have to save victims, But okay, victims are fighting. Why didn't they tell to those who are now victims, fight? No leftist would have said that. It was an imperialist war, whatever. And I find horrible this liberal left stance of whenever there are victims, we should help them. What about a positive project? Now you will say these projects are not possible. They are possible. Later we can go into it, to offer people not simply the expansion of Western values, but nonetheless a different form of Western values. I talk too much. You should kill me. Now you go.
Let me ask you I'll ask you one question, and then we'll go to Professor Ann Lee. The creeping fascism here in the United States. I wonder if it's creeping. I wonder if it's already here. From your observation, is America equipped to combat fascism? The people, are we equipped?
Yeah. I will say something that nobody will like, probably. Often, I think, the liberal left uses the term fascism in an all too easy way. You have something you don't like, then it must be fascism. We neglect, nonetheless, I'm not saying that Trump was much better, but his logic was different. First, I don't think, in spite of all rumors, that Trump really wanted to make a coup d'etat. As typical populist, he, at the same time, dismisses representative democracy, party politics as corrupted, partial, controlled by elites, but he's very careful not to step out of its frame into a direct dictatorship. And that's what maybe makes Trump even more dangerous. Trump doesn't want to step out of liberalism. And once when I spoke about Julian Assange, and somebody asked me, can you condense Assange's achievement into one sentence? I said it's simply that the most dangerous unfreedom is the unfreedom that you experience as freedom. You are not even fully aware how controlled, manipulated you are. That was also my defense when Assange was attacked for accepting the help of Putin and so on and so on. My argument is, yes, Putin is to be criticized, China and so on. But their people don't have any illusion. You are controlled, regulated. The horrible thing about United States, the most dangerous, is that not only in spite of Trump, you feel free, ordinary people, all those who, but you even in some sense accept that against some abstract state regulation, big corporation, and so on, that Trump effectively stands for freedom of ordinary people, and so on and so on. So if it is fascism, whatever, it's not the old type of fascism with this disciplinary military rule. And no, Trump thrives in this media corruption, manipulations, and so on and so on. Second thing, as I always repeat, we should never forget that, sorry to use this blah blah term, misused, that Trump is a symptom of what went on with liberal democratic consensus in the United States. So to really get rid of Trump, one must ask what was not radical, strong enough, and so on in this liberal democratic consensus. Why this consensus didn't succeed in mobilizing people more? Because you know what made me sad in Afghanistan? This how their armed forces simply disintegrated and so on and so on. That's the strength overall in the world of this new right-wing populism. And it's not enough just to attack them as proto-fascists. We must ask ourselves what was wrong with the hegemonic liberal democratic model. That's the problem of Europe today, even more than United States. In Europe, we all hate Orban, Polish government, and so on and so on. We are not asking the question what we, the enlightened Brussels bureaucracy and so on, what we were doing wrong. And I think that, quite naively, that I don't have any illusions about Bernie Sanders and so on. But this leftist mass movement is a sign of hope. Let's see what will happen. But I think still that that the only thing that we should learn the lesson of Trump. You remember when Trump was during his first electoral campaign, when he was attacking opponents, many moderate Republicans told him, no, you are too exclusive, you should open toward the middle. He did exactly the opposite and he won. And the so-called democratic left shouldn't be afraid to do the same. This is maybe the Obama mistake, this fear, which was already Bill Clinton's fear, you know. My God, are we losing this middle class, moderate, and so on? No, the paradox, Trump taught us this, is that the large unity which mobilizes people require first a strong act of division, not we cover all, but sorry, we are not that. Clear
division defines who we are. It's leadership. We're all looking for somebody to march in one direction. And even if it's the wrong direction, most of us will follow because we crave leadership. So that's why Trump.
You know what I will tell you here? Now, another horrible thing for liberals. I have nothing against strong leaders. There are two types of leaders. I will define them exactly, authoritarian leaders whose motto is, I know better than you what is good for yourself, you know. They know it. But if you take more authentic leaders, okay, let's take one who was, for my notions, even too soft, who should have been a little bit more radical, but everybody, at least officially, loves him, Nelson Mandela. Authentic leader is just his message is, and Obama later, when he was elected, abused this message. His message is, yes, not we can, yes, you can. An authentic leader awakens you. He doesn't tell you what to do, but he gives you the courage, you can do it. Fight for your freedom. Because, you know, in our everyday life, in this liberal, everyday hedonism, we are not really free. We have to be somehow cult to freedom, and we need an authentic leader. I think also because, you know, leader which doesn't tell you in detail what you have to do, but a leader who solicits you. Here, although I'm very critical of Mao Zedong, at the beginning of Cultural Revolution, when he said to young people, you have the right to rebel, something like this is needed today. We need leaders who will mobilize people not only for the pandemic, but for ecology. That's why I, to provoke people, like to use the term communism to provoke them. But my message is very simple. Listen, back to Chile. What I learned now is that there is a terrifying drought in the south of Chile. Agriculture almost ruined and so on. But it's not there, the result of what they did. It's way out in the Pacific Ocean. There is a kind of a condensed bubble of hot air being there already for 2-3 years. And this bubble is, of course, the result of global perturbation of nature and so on. It's the same when you had this terrifying, it was a horror for me. You remember in Vancouver, Seattle, in that area, almost 50 degrees Celsius, when a month ago, something like that. I was horrified because I love Vancouver and so on. But what I want to say is that it's stupid to say you have to take care of that. No, it's a global perturbance of natural circulation, which by total contingency produced an effect there. And it wasn't even only there. The true horror is that, you know, a city in northern Siberia, which has the official title of being the coldest city on earth. Well, this summer it was 33, 34 degrees Celsius. Right. So isn't it clear that we can, I'm not saying abolish the market, privatize everything. No, I'm not crazy. This brings new corruption and so on. I'm saying some kind of global, not just in a state, social coordination is needed. Look, because of perturbances in weather, it's quite a realist prospect that in a couple of years, we will have to move millions of people. There are regions of Earth, like the wealthiest, like Emirates and so on, where now you have regular temperatures in summer over about 55 degrees. Even the Arabs, allegedly used to live there, cannot do it. People will have to be moved. This happened in the past. It was resolved through war. Now we cannot afford it and so on. By communism to provoke people, I just mean more global coordination. Yes, use the market where it's productive and so on. But some forms of global coordination will be needed.
David, is it okay if I ask jump in and ask a quick question about that? Because I've heard you say that before, Slavoj, and I've always been curious, you know, because you talk about, you know, communism and, you know, talk about global coordination for sort of society-wide planning to deal with problems, but you also say, well, of course, you know, can't abolish the market. And I guess what I'm curious about that is whether, you know, you think that to actually have communism in your sense, you would still need some sort of structural economic changes, maybe something like what people sometimes think of as market socialism, or whether you just think that's a separate issue.
No, it's not. But here I am now. I will say something for which, if you don't have other reasons, you will now abolish me. You know.
Okay, well, I'm not going to abolish you for the fact.
I forgot the guy's name, but some Slovene, very leftist politician told me that he's now reading. Didn't some follower of Hayek? Yes, Hayek, that one. One of his followers wrote a book called Left Hayekianism, something like that. The idea being that the centralization, the way Marx imagined it, through some transparent, through some head of public authority, which in a totally transparent way regulates social production, that this not only that it's in a simple sense non-efficient, but it opens a space for incredible additional corruption and so on. So for me, market simply means, but it never means simply that, of course, that there is a certain unpredictability, non-transparency of social life. But I think that market will have to be nonetheless what the Chinese are trying to do, although I'm extremely critical of them. There has to be a public authority which not controls the market in this violent sense of this commodity should cost that and so on, but to think very well, we can need this, we can leave this domain to market, we should control it, prevent monopolies and so on and so on. Because the paradox of the market, of the free market, is that today, without strong state intervention, market would already have been self-abolished by big companies and so on and so on. Not all the market, but some parts. So I think that because of my living in socialist past, what I don't want to engage in is to oppose market with traditional state centralization and so on.
But China, in some ways, China, in a really weird way, is what a lot of Western socialists have always advocated, which is that you have like a bunch of state planning at the high levels of the economy, kind of the commanding heights, and then you have a lot of market interactions, a lot of other places. It's just a very economically unequal and very politically undemocratic version of that.
Right now, as we speak, Xi is addressing the same problems we're facing here in the United States. The concentration.
Sorry, who is Xi? Who is the lady?
No, Xi, I think you said.
Xi.
Xi.
Sorry, not Xi, but yeah. Sorry.
The leader of China is addressing right now the same problems that America is trying to address: the concentration of wealth, income inequality, and I think by taking over the commanding heights of capitalism or whatever China is, I think they'll succeed.
You think you know why I am skeptical for at micro level, personal experiences? No. You remember that the hero who was for me a kind of the closest you can get to Chinese songs, that guy who was one of the first who identified COVID and then he was dying, no? He died almost in front of the camera. And among his last words were something like, I don't remember the exact words, but something like, those in power should get a feedback, should listen to the people. So for me, it's not just multi-party and so on. It's a kind of a authentic feedback. And I don't think you get this in China. I have another proof. You know that around 2 years ago, I was for a couple of months prohibited there. My books disappeared, translations from books. Why? Because the most tragic thing in China now is the fate of some young students who were forced to read Mao in this new Xi orientation, and then they took it too seriously. They said, okay, Mao workers' interests, and then they discovered that in the suburbs of Beijing, there are a couple of chemical factories, totally non-protective, workers dropping from pollution and so on, dropping dead, and they tried to organize them. They just disappeared. And the beautiful irony is that one who disappeared had a mother who inquired into why did my son disappear. It's like a bad joke. You know what happened? She disappeared the next day. And this is the problem with China. Yes, they try to regulate ecology and all that stuff, but it is, look, let's take the pandemic. Yes, they are doing it now the harsh way, but with a little bit more openness and backward information, maybe many specialists say they would have been able to prevent pandemic at the beginning. They lost crucial month or 2 months at the beginning. If they were to act then, if they were to listen to those scientists, probably it would have remain a local event there. So no, I don't. Yes, I find sympathetic what you mentioned, but the problem is this interaction with people. Yes, we need strong power and so on, but there has to be strong interaction with people. You have to have public space. And if anything in China now, the public space is narrowing, disappearing.
Professor Ann Lee, you have a question?
I'm glad to hear you, so that at least it will not be only men talking. Sure. At least, yeah, please.
Well, no, following up on that, in China, one of the issues is people aren't quite so concerned about achieving status and stuff. And I recall that you referred to liberals as communists with diplomas. And in some ways,
no, Orban said this. Sorry, Orban said this.
All right. I'm sorry, I don't mean to misquote you.
Yeah.
But that seems to be the big problem. Is status? Is that a lot of what normally would be important institutions have now become more corrupted or more rigid.
Yeah. Now I am. Let me be clear. I am for a certain degree of rigidity, which can simply means that you have a certain firm authority, which is not simply at the disposal of contingent market or whatever forces, but not that kind of rigidity. Look, isn't this, maybe you, if you know the situation from the first, can correct me here. Isn't it so sad that now students are obliged there to read Mao, but with a silent understanding, don't take it seriously. Just read it as a symbolic gesture. Mao is now, and I have no illusions about Mao. Many things genuinely horrified me in what Mao did. But nonetheless, I am afraid of this functioning of ideology where the supreme authority is really not important. And this reminds me of my youth. I'll put it like this. The general problem with communist countries, I lived in one, it's not that the authorities want to impose some brutal communist ideology. No, it's that, like in my country, ex-Yugoslavia, I had a couple of friends who were sincerely orthodox Marxists. Sincerely. They lost their job because the authorities were well aware that if you take Marxism too seriously, you will sooner or later discover that, my God, what it has here is not, in any meaningful sense, a democratic, socialist, Marxist regime. So that's so horrible for me about all these countries. Communist countries, that the ruling ideology always combined a strong measure of cynicism, distance, and so on and so on. It's a beautiful paradox of a ruling ideology which only was able to function if it was not taken seriously by its subject. Yeah. And I knew examples like this, So for me, again, the problem with China is not this multi-party necessarily and so on, but the problem is the feedback, a genuine feedback from the people. And this is what do you think? Is my perception wrong? I'm not sure. You obviously know more.
No, I hardly. But I think it's just a question in China of scale, that it is so large that it allows these kinds of regional, resistance or fractions, and it's just the fact that it's very large and unwieldy. It's just a matter of size.
I totally agree with you. Do you know Wang Hui, the Chinese, one of the leftist philosophers? I hope I will not compromise him by saying that, he told me that he met a guy who was friendly with Deng Xiaoping's daughter. When Deng Xiaoping was dying, he was just whispering and only his daughter was only able to understand. And he said that when Deng Xiaoping was dying, all those his DS guys came to him, celebrating him, and they often asked him the question, what do you think was your greatest political act? Everybody thought he will say it's opening China to market economy. And he said no, to resist at that point the temptation to go all the way to multi-party democracy. Now people usually say this was authoritarian cynicism, but as you said, I take this seriously, you know. What if, because of all these regional differences and so on, China would maybe even fall apart, would not have functioned the way it is? I don't trust liberals when they say, oh, they did an economic miracle, but with full democracy, they would make even a greater miracle. I'm not so sure, maybe not. So I'm not talking necessarily about no central authority and so on. I'm just talking about a greater degree of feedback.
Great. Professor Adnan Hussein.
Our Taliban friend, perfect.
Yes.
Sorry,
I want to reaffirm any stereotypes.
Yeah. I like stereotypes.
Yeah, I know. That's the problem. Yes, that's right. I know you love them. So, Yeah. But actually, it does relate to this question of aspects of character and presumptions about them. There's so many interesting points to bring up. I kind of wanted to come back to that question of fascism, and you were suggesting that we can't just, stereotypically condemn everything that the left wants to oppose by labeling it fascism. And you raised the issue of right-wing populism. So it seems like maybe you would suggest that this era where we're seeing the resurgence of different movements of right-wing populism globally around the world can't necessarily be captured by just talking about it as fascism. And I read an interesting article by Paul Mason, the English.
I know him, my British friend. Yes. And so because you're interested in the psychoanalytic dimensions as well, he had a kind of interesting talk about Erich Fromm's ideas, and he was trying to revive them to interpret the contemporary moment a little bit better. And one formulation he came up with was a rejoinder to Arendt's response to the suggestion that fascism was something endemic to the German character. And she said, no, it was the disintegration of German character. And so what Paul Mason was suggesting is that at this moment, what we're witnessing is the disintegration of neoliberal character. Yeah,
and it's.
I signed it with, as they did it when they wanted to congratulate Saddam. A person who always won was that he drew a portrait of Saddam with his blood instead of pencil. So with my blood, I'm ready to write that what you said just now is absolutely so important. Yes, a certain hegemonic model is disintegrating. And that's what I didn't like, you remember, in the inauguration of Biden, which was as if, okay, this nightmare will be over, let's return to the situation before Trump ruined it. I don't think it's possible, but I'm sorry I interrupt you, please.
Oh no, that's exactly right. I was interested in your response to whether that's an accurate analysis, and it led Paul Mason in this essay to suggest a few things that we need to do in trying to confront the contemporary right-wing populism, because it's really the failure of neoliberalism to provide any answers.
Yes.
So
but
some
let
of the
me
things.
tell you something, which may interest you here. I was always harsh against Hannah Arendt, but now I begin to appreciate her. Speaking about authority and so on, I recently read something that she wrote. I find it very important apropos authority. She wrote already way back in the early 60s, I think, that today, because of the social processes, influence of peers and so on, family no longer has an authority. Parents are really rather impotent and so on. But then she says something ingenious. She says, but this doesn't give the right to your father, mother, to tell you when you are perplexed what's going on. Listen, we are also victims of social processes. We cannot help you. It's all shit. We don't control anything. No, heroically, even if this is true, you must act with authority. Even if your authority is not justified. This is not fascism. This is the only way to be. This is the only way to be a good parent. Another thing which may interest you even more, the guy whom I already mentioned, Pierre Bayard, wrote now a book about the importance of tales, narrative stories, which never happened, how they can play a very positive role. And you know what's his main example? I love it. Hannah Arendt's Eichmann in Jerusalem. Because Pierre Bayard says something very interesting. He says, on the one hand, this idea of banality of evil, bureaucrats who do evil, it's a very pertinent, important idea. It tells something. But he used the wrong example. And he demonstrates by documents and so on that, sorry, whatever you think about Eichmann, he was a fanatical, well-conscious, brutal anti-Semite. He was not the banality of evil. And the irony is that although she used a wrong example, she nonetheless proposed a very important, correct notion. And then Bayard uses two other examples. You remember, it's one of American urban, not even urban, only legends. Orson Welles' staging of War of the Worlds as the radio show. The myth is at least 10,000 of people got into a panic, roads were packed, and so on and so on. A guy then went to check hospital, police records, and so on. No, mostly 10, 15 people did it. He went through police records and so on. There were no mass movement, no higher number, nothing in police records. So again, I think that the result was a right one, as we see today, even more than that point. This conspiracy theory shows, but there is this painful paradox that at the beginning, to propose a correct notion, which will become correct only in the long term, you have to use a wrong example. And sorry, I will immediately end up with the third example. You know who was Kitty something, I forgot? A lady who was stabbed to death in front of her. Sorry?
Genevieve. Kitty Genevieve.
Now I checked.
And that's a myth too.
You know, it's a myth. Yes, there were no 38 people who saw it. Only 3 people saw it, and all of them did try to reach police, but none did try to call police. But nonetheless, it's a correct example, which was later triumphantly confirmed by empirical tests. How? If you witness a guy beating somebody else, if you are alone, you will probably call police. If there are others with you, you will oscillate much more, like why aren't others calling and so on. But you see this wonderful paradox, you know. And also, as an old Stalinist, I'm saying this, you know, people forget this, that Hannah Arendt is much more precise. She never simply equates fascism and Nazism and Stalinism. She's very specific. Yes, that in the strict sense, she says Stalinism was totalitarian, just I think she puts it from 34, 35 to late 40s, I don't know. She's much more precise here, because this is what always fascinated me. But to go back to what you said, yes, it's what I would have said, this in Lacanian terms, very brutally, disintegration of the big other, of the public authority. And I think that we should openly say public authority, not in some mystical sense of, I don't know, higher authority, but in the sense of we need some common space of shared values and so on. We can debate this, but within this space and so on, what we are getting now is simply in conspiracy theories and others, that it's really some kind of re-tribalization and so on. No, and we shouldn't be afraid here to call for, I'm using a horrible term, public discipline as a condition of our actual freedom. I think that there is no contradiction in Trump being this ruthless, liberal, conspiracy theories, you think whatever you want, and the authoritarian side of Trump, which was there, of course.
Yeah, that's interesting. It suggests, just as a follow-up to that, I'm wondering then, since this gets back to the beginning of the conversation in some ways about the rule-based requirements for actual freedom versus sort of theoretical freedom. And so I'm wondering if in terms of vaccination policy, for example, how you would imagine applying exactly that insight that you just had about, how you create a sense of public discipline that is not going to be so frail as to be undermined by, that sense of it being imposed and contravening people's theoretical freedom, Yeah,
but now I don't have a concrete answer, but my answer is precisely the one provided by you. In how we react to pandemic, here we see the actual consequences of what you just called this disintegration of the public space and so on and so on. So that's how I think we should talk with people. Sorry if this sounds patronizing, but to ordinary people. When we talk about public space, big other, blah, blah, we are not talking about abstract things, my God. We are talking about things which concern their daily lives. With us in Slovenia, as I already said, I'm absolutely not anti-American here, because in Slovenia, we are now getting even much worse. I don't know if you have it also in the States. It's a kind of almost globalized indifference, like now Slovenia, and it's, as your beloved President ex-Trump would have put it, we are a shithole of a country with just 2 million people. But now we are again at over 1,000 new infections per day. But people are somehow tired. They are not ready to take it seriously. On the street, you see almost nobody with a mask. Sometimes, in some strange way, people are tired of it all. And I understand people, because as I always repeat, what is threatened? What is under threat today, but I don't think it's a big corporate threat, is the limitation, gradual disappearance of our common sense daily way of life. You go out, talk with others, and so on, communicate, and so on. And I don't think this is just a big capitalist corporate threat. I think that the tragedy is this one, if I may just finish. On the one hand, we have, the Pegasus software program and so on. So people are becoming aware of how, to an incredible level, our lives are controlled. Everything is written and so on, and programs which control us are getting more and more precise and individualized. It's no longer that just some generalities and so on. But I think people who feel this, in some sense, broadly applied this to the pandemic. This general fear against big corporations and so on, all that stuff. So when people tell me, do you agree about all those programs that, for example, follow where you move? I said, I have no problem with that. This is a very limited control. I worry much more about how I already am controlled with other programs, which, like simple thing. Are you aware? I know from my wife who buys Kindle books. Are you aware that when you read a Kindle book, not only Amazon gets to know what you are reading, but also in what written are you reading, on which pages you are, and so on. I mean, we are with incredible capacity of today's mega computers. It is possible to get two things. First, police state, which is really effective, which in pre-digital times it wasn't possible. but at the same time, which the police state, it doesn't openly encroach or limit your freedom superficially. So obviously, we have to limit our freedom. We have to rethink our freedom. I think we lived for too long a time under this impression that, freedom means freedom of choice. No, I think too much of a choice can paradoxically even limit the true choice. The true freedom is, for me, the freedom to change the terms of the choice, like I don't want just Coke and Pepsi. There are subdivisions like some shitty organic Coke or whatever, and so on and so on. We have to redefine our freedom. What do we mean in everyday life, not at an abstract theoretical level?
Right. The reason
Russell, you didn't yet attack me. Russell, all the others, our Taliban friend, the Ben Burgess, and Russell, you didn't yet attack me.
The reason Apple is so successful is it offers fewer choices. This is what you're going to get. Take it or leave it. Professor Ben Burgess.
I was actually curious about maybe going back to the beginning of the conversation about fascism, although I did want to say while you were talking about China earlier, I was thinking about a few years ago, I taught a summer class at Jilin University in China, and when people said, they had to take Marxism classes, as like a gen ed requirement essentially there, I was super curious about this, and I remember one student telling me, this may be an exaggeration, or one particular teacher or something, but they said that they were told that you didn't actually need to read primary sources in Marxism class because the Chinese Communist Party had synthesized it all so well. It was now redundant to have to read the.
But sorry to interrupt you. Then you can go on. You know what would be my point here? The subtle message of you don't have to read is even maybe it's better for you not to read it.
Yeah, well, I also actually talked to a Marxism professor at Jilin, and it was a really strange conversation. Like they said, like the things they were trying to, or I guess this was one of the students, but it was part of the same conversation, that the big things they got out of the Marxism class were about individual responsibility and everybody's efforts to build up the Chinese nation. I thought, man, so those two things that Karl Marx constantly wrote about, individual responsibility and Chinese nationalism, that's what you're learning in your Marxism class.
No, but this is something that again, but this is, yes, I agree with you. This is horrible what you were told, because you see today, with regard to ecology, Etienne Balibar, I think, made a remark how this, and this line of thought of mine, I think, how this focus on individual responsibility is one of the ways of the hegemonic ideology and capitalism to reproduce themselves as function smoothly. Like, I often was witness to this debate. I criticize some big companies, and then they tell me, yeah, it's easy to criticize, but did you do your individual duty? Did you put all cans of Coke in one bag, all newspapers in another, and so on and so on? So then all of a sudden, instead of radical, critical thinking, you are, and all left liberals love this, you are at this infinite, left liberals enjoy feeling guilty and probing deep into their guilt. Like, oh my God, I used that expression. Was I maybe sexist or racist, And it's the same with this. Did you do enough? No, we have to become aware of proper proportions here. How one big corporation pollutes the environment more than 1 million people in all their lives, and so on and so on. We should precisely not put things here at the level of individual responsibility. And it's strange when you said, Ben, that they got this as a lesson, because if there is a point in Marx, it is that maybe in an even too simple way, that in some sense, even capitalists for their exploitation are not individually responsible,
Yeah, it's not.
And also, when you said that common good, do you work for common good? Marx would have exploded at this idea of opposing individual responsibility working for common good, where the elementary Marxist move here is, and it's still very useful today, it's, okay, but define common good. Are there any ideological biases in the common good? You know, like how exactly do you define common good? Their ideology is there. That's why which thing I most like from when I was young. I spoke with a guy, he visited Ljubljana, who was an American congressman, a left Democrat. And then this was about Watergate era, whatever. I, as a total idiot, raised the question of corruption and so on. And he said, you know that there are very honest Republicans who are not personally corrupted, but do much less good than some corrupted Democrats. You know? So I'm not saying we should ignore corruption, absolutely not. But what I'm saying is that we shouldn't moralize in this false way politics.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that Michael Brooks always used to point out, talking about things like the prosecution of Lula in Brazil, that the thing about anti-corruption politics is that it's kind of apolitical. It's, you could use it to advance anything because there's no real ideology there. And this goes back to the point about the Chinese, pseudo-Marxism classes, because it's just about individual moral virtue. So I did want to go back real quickly just to where we started, because I'd be curious about your take on this. I think that there is like an interesting tension in a lot of American progressive views about Trump and Trumpism, because on the one hand, there's a correct critique I think we all agree with, that like Trump's response to the pandemic was criminally negligent, and there should have been lots of like a much more thorough lockdown. There should have been test and trace, all of this stuff. And then on the other hand, there's all this analysis of Trump as as a fascist, and it seems like an actually authoritarian leader. Like if that was the big problem with Trump, if the big problem with Trump wasn't just that he was doing what Romney would have done if he was president, deregulating, appointing conservative judges who would overturn abortion, but if the big problem with Trump is that he was this radical new authoritarian break, that's very confusing how he responded to the pandemic, because you'd think this would be the golden opportunity for an authoritarian consolidation of power. I mean, but
it's clear why he didn't do it. Because in Slovenia, the present right-wing government is trying to do this. Although at the beginning they were following Trump and proclaiming that the threat of pandemic is a leftist exaggeration to impose socialist dictatorship. Now they turned around the disc, the music, and now they claim that leftists are against vaccination to prevent the operative ability of the government and so on. But don't you think the problem with Trump is this one, that his he had many bases which he represented. There were many big corporations and so on. But maybe the key component of his support was these middle class, even some lower class individuals who perceive the state as infringing on all that. And it's very difficult to get that American type of populism into a proper authoritarian fascist frame. What Trump was doing would have been unacceptable for a true fascist, I think. Maybe I'm wrong, I'm not sure.
Sounds right to me.
So, Professor Spriglia, do you have a question? And how are we doing on time, sir?
Yes, you can call him Professor, because I hate him. He's my best friend. But yes, call him Professor, not me. Yes.
Okay.
Professor Spriglia, up yours.
Oh, Jesus. No, well, I was just thinking about the discussion we were having earlier about the question of leadership, and I was also thinking about that along the same lines of the Chinese students who were who were disappeared for reading Marx or reading Mao and taking it too seriously. There's a connection there, I think, but I don't buy any of the. And it's also a sort of callback, Slavoj, to your earlier point about having to like admit this, like, you know, gritting your teeth that some of the things that Biden has done aren't so bad. I think Biden himself, as far as leadership goes, is I wouldn't give him a very high grade, but the degree to which and it's actually kind of tied into what Adnan was asking you about, the degree to which this sort of the erosion of the neoliberal consensus has pushed Biden to, we've spent, not nearly enough, but to have spent, over, what was it? What was the coronavirus package? 1.8 trillion. And now, who knows what's going to happen with the reconciliation bill that now that, Manchin is threatening to hold it up.
Here I become a Stalinist. Sorry to interrupt you. Don't you think that one should liquidate aren't there 4 or 5 members of the Democratic Party in the Senate? And they are the danger.
Well, I mean, and it's apparently more than just Manchin and Sinema. They're just happy to take the, to take the press and to take the hit for other people, like maybe Chris Coons. But to what degree is it? I'm not saying that it doesn't matter that it's Biden, but to what degree is it the fact that has the political imagination and regardless of what centrist Democrats want to do, their hand is being forced. And I'm saying the forces of reaction will always be there, but it's almost like the problem for somebody like Biden is similar to the problem with the old authority. Like, oh, these people are taking it too seriously. It's like we can't just use Black Lives Matter as a slogan. We actually have to, we're going to be pushed to actually implement this. Or we can't just take Medicare for all as this sort of popular slogan. Where things are moving in that direction, however slowly. So I guess this isn't so much a question as a reflection on to what degree has the political terrain itself or world, this sort of broad again, world historical events, the politicians, we still haven't caught up with it yet.
I agree, but here again, maybe I'm too much of a cynical realist, although I don't consider myself cynical in any serious sense. Namely, I still prefer this hypocritical strategy. We must be for healthcare for all, although we always find an excuse. But hypocrisy at least opens up the way for criticism. Then you can say, no, we have to take it seriously, and so on and so on. So I am for hypocrisy insofar as it sustains a certain critical space. This was always Marx's position. Stupid leftists only quote that Marx, bourgeois freedoms are just formal freedoms, Yeah, but out of this forum, many very positive things happened. Yes, first they were just formal freedoms. But then Mary Wollstonecraft, women said, we also want it. Then a world historical event, black slaves in Haiti said, we also want it. Workers said, actual freedom, why not also social freedom, and so on and so on. For me, the most beautiful example of this, it was told to me, maybe you know it, by a Mexican friend. That Virgin of Guadalupe, of course, the black virgin which appeared already around 1,600, not too many in Mexico, no? At the beginning, Christianity was just imposed by the colonizers. What happened with that appearance of a black virgin is that the very religion of colonizers was creatively reappropriated to express the deep discontent, horror of the lives of those enslaved, and so on. So again, I am all for hypocrisy insofar as it is the first step towards more awareness. Like, this is how we should criticize bourgeois modernity. As some critical race guys did it, put it in a wonderful way, You know, the big thing of modernity from 16th, 17th century was against slavery. Nobody should be slave. We should, but how strangely, exactly at that period, because capitalism necessitated this, actual slavery exploded in the 16th, 17th century. So isn't the paradox that precisely when of the early Enlightenment thinkers, the obsession was against slavery, the sense was, in a strict legal sense, metaphoric slavery. A worker is a slave, women are slaves, and so on. But they tolerated literal slavery. And here, maybe I should, I'm getting tired, tell you a story of how, that's my historical pessimism, how even the most progressive ideas can be used for bad purposes. You remember, for me, one of the original bad guys of American politics, Andrew Jackson, kind of proto-Trump. Populist for ordinary people, but kill the natives, you know, move west. But you know which idea, there was something like left-wing genocide of Native Americans. And you know who was their reference? A very leftist thought of, I think it was not David Hume, it was John Locke, who said, meaning, of course, the European capitalist constellation, but Locke already applied it to the United States. His reasoning was this one, very leftist one. There should be a limited amount of private property, but only if you can effectively work on it, productively use it, you know. But then Locke went on and he said, but look at the natives in America. They have this immense territory which they don't use productively. They just vegetate on it. So we need actual workers to use that, which is why, screw them, the natives go and colonize it. It's a very dangerous, this is for me ideology at its best, which means most horrible. No? How? This progressive idea, no, property should be limited and linked to your productivity, can be used in a directly brutal, racist way to justify genocide.
Well, you've been very generous with your time, and I would love to have you come back with this esteemed panel. Professor Adnan Hussein went on Twitter, asked his followers and my followers, our followers, what questions you would like to ask Žižek. And there was
okay, give me the last one, yeah.
There was one question from a M.W. von Walter who asked you, how do we go about making new cliches? And the reason that is interesting to me is because Professor Hussein intimated that you like stereotypes. So absolutely. What is the difference between, what is the difference between a cliche and a stereotype? And can comedy exist? Can jokes exist without cliches and stereotypes?
They cannot, but my own country, ex-Yugoslavia, is for me a model of how. Don't ask me, this is too theoretical now to give you an exact definition of the difference between stereotype and cliché. But I remember before nationalism, it's my old story, sorry if some of you know it, before nationalism exploded in mid-80s and then the war in early 90s, when we met with friends from other republics, we joyfully, mockingly repeated all the cliches and so on. And the point was to mobilize the racist cliches, but in such a beautiful, ironic way, you know, that it was the most efficient way, again, to undermine racism. Like, I don't know, Montenegro people were supposed to be lazy. Bosniaks were supposed to be too sexually obsessed. We Slovenes were supposed to be, how do you call it, miser, stingy, don't want to pay the bill. But
well, that one's true, though. That one's just true.
No, absolutely. I think when I visit the country, the only cognitive mapping that you get is cliches. And I think all good things happened when I noticed when I was with Scotland, in Scotland. Scottish people are supposed to be misers. And they were always so generous to me paying the bill, but it was clear that it was a reaction to cliché. They knew this is their cliché, Even in Germany today, Germany is today much less racist than, although you have also worrisome tendencies there, much less racist than France or England, precisely because there is all the time in the background that, of course, Nazi horror. And just to tell another thing, who was it there? Who said that about Hannah Arendt, that the Nazism was against the true German tradition? Yes, and there is a wonderful detail which people forget, which sort of confirms it. It was this popular association, Prussian officers' discipline. No, Prussia, that region, they were too elitist officers. They didn't like Nazism. The roots of Nazism were mostly in this southern, decadent, enjoy the life Bavaria, Right. No, I think we should rehabilitate almost against Nazism, the Prussian military spirit and so on. So, but back to the cliches. We need cliches as some kind of basic orientation. A language without cliches is simply a lifeless language. I'm not saying, of course, that we should accept cliches, but it's a wonderful anti-racist experience to mockingly undermine cliches, but the cliches have to be there to do it. That's my problem with political correctness. I think that in some sense, the way they fight racist and other cliches, in some sense, by prohibiting them in the right way, in the long term, it only reconfirms racist prejudices and so on and so on.
Do you see, my last question is, Michael Brooks, who it's a sacred name on this show and among our group, he was a big fan of a show called Come Town, which was severely profane. They didn't traffic their speech, and it was a relief to him and me and my friends to just be able to hear jokes, unbridled, whatever, politically incorrect.
Absolutely agree. Sorry, I don't know that one, but you know whom I, up to a certain level, but nonetheless admire? Larry David. He just barely escaped being prohibited for his post-Seinfeld show, where there was, I think this brought him so much trouble, where there was, it was so intelligent, but people took it as mocking the Holocaust. Did you see one episode where
it was on Saturday Night Live? You're talking about when he was hosting Saturday Night Live, or
was it this one where he had two people, one actual Holocaust survivor and one winner of the Survivor show TV,
right.
And they struggle who suffered more, and of course the survivor of the of the reality show wins. I don't think this in any sense really downplays the horror of the Holocaust. The whole joke works precisely because we know that the situation is totally absurd. That, of course, Holocaust cannot be. And I was so delighted from my Israeli friends to learn. That Jews had a whole series of Holocaust jokes, which were, as they told me, the only way for them to survive when things were really horrible immediately after World War II, or even, for example, in Poland itself. You couldn't afford this historical awareness. Oh my God, you can only tolerate it through jokes. It's the same in Bosnia with the Srebrenica massacre. There is a whole subspecies of jokes. Although I admit it, there are jokes and jokes. I don't believe generally in abstract redeeming power of laughter. We should never forget that there is also a specific arrogant humor, or, for example, in socialist countries, upper level bureaucrats making fun of the lower class, stupid, naive people. Even in China, from my friends, I learned that there is a whole series of jokes making fun of stupid provincial lower level party secretaries in a small town or a factory. But these are strictly upper level, higher state bureaucracy jokes about that. So I don't believe that in general jokes are necessarily subversive. No, there are jokes and jokes. There are also extremely brutal, arrogant, racist jokes and so on and so on. I admit it.
Well, I agree with you. I won't say it's an honor to have you on the show.
Don't say this.
I won't say it. Actually, it's been an inconvenience and yes. And you know what you should say? I would love you to say this, that next time if we meet on the street, yes, you will look, and if you see me on one side of the street, you will pray to God that you will see me early enough to quickly cross the street and go to the other side. To me, it often happens this, and then of course I'm a pure hypocrite, and I say, "How nice to meet you," and all that bullshit. Right. Well, some people say Žižek is the Elvis of cultural theory. That's what
no, you know what's my paradox? And Russell, although I hate him again, but he got that, and I'm glad that we moved in the same direction. That people claim I'm a no, I'm not a crazy postmodernist. I want to return to classical big philosophy. I'm very orthodox here. I'm tired of these endless postmodern games and so on. I like more and more clear, great philosophical thesis, political thesis, and so on and so on. So now I will say something for which you can kill me. For a long time, I haven't had such a nice conversation than the one with you. And David, I like you especially because when I first saw you, I hope here we are not normal people like Ben and Russell. You look to me as a serious guy. My God, you will discipline us or whatever. Now I suspect you are the dirtiest of all of us. And that's why I
Yeah.
Thanks very much. It was nice.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let me plug your book. That's the least I can do. So you can... because you've written 50 books. The most recent is Pandemic, COVID-19 Shake.
That's the second one. Now, these days, it will be out, but only for print on demand. I'm very mad at that. The third volume, the title is Heaven in Disorder, part 3 of my political writings. But life goes on. Okay.
I have one question.
Pleasure for me.
Yes. This is a question I ask of everyone. What is your reading hygiene? What is your reading discipline each day, please?
I need 2 texts. One easier one, a detective novel, and one difficult one, so that when I get tired with the one, I jump to the other. I jump here and there.
How many hours do you spend reading?
Not enough, because I had some eye inflammation problems and so on, but still I have this Boy Scout logic, every day I have to read something, I have to write a little bit. If I don't do it, I feel guilty.
And how many hours are we talking about?
Because of small obligations here and there, I have to make breaks all the time, but if I'm active less than 5 hours, if in Stalinist Russia, I would have volunteered for Gulag.
You don't read for 5 hours a day?
No, read and write.
Read and write for 5 days.
But not in one, not at once, like 1 hour here, 1 hour there. I'm very flexible here. I can work on airplanes, in trains, and so on and so on. As a matter of fact, I remember years ago, now it's horrible because on many planes, if you fly business class, and because of my age, I have to, you get free internet. But really, I hate it because what I like about these really long flights, not United, but from Europe here to Latin America to Australia, isn't that something wonderful? You are like 15, 20 hours out of contact with reality.
Right. And what is your baseline? What do you have to read each day? Is there a newspaper? Is there a website that you go to that you have to go to every day?
Just quickly follow news on CNN, Guardian, and some other sites. No. It must be a little bit of serious theory, philosophy, political theory, and so on. I'm absolutely
trust a specific. You don't trust the New York Times to tell you.
I don't even follow New York Times. I'm somewhere between, but not because I like them, but because they are most practical for quick news, just to get what is going on. And here we are more used to CNN and Guardian in Europe. But I'm not saying absolutely not. They are the best. But
is there any value to an organization that is gathering news and then telling you each day, this is important? We have the brightest people in our newsroom, and we believe. I'm not aware of it. You don't think that there's any value to like a BBC?
Probably no. Probably it is. I'm not saying there is not. I'm just saying that I am not aware. If you have a suggestion that there is a domain or whatever website where you click that and you learn all that is really important, I would like to know it. No?
The comment section on Pornhub for me always gets me through the
Pornhub, but how can you skip the other part of? I mean,
he only goes there to read the comments.
Now you are a dirty old man. What I mean is that if they catch you looking at naked women or whatever is there, you say, no, this was by mistake. I'm really just for the news there. They have the best comment section.
Comment section, you can't beat it.
I must say, many people, but sincerely, they were not lying, were telling me that in Playboy 30 years ago and more, they had quite good long interviews and so on. Yes. It wasn't all bullshit.
There's an interview with Thomas Pynchon from like a Playboy from the early 70s that I read for the articles.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And the review section in Hustler was magnificent. I'm kidding. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I really I really enjoyed it, and keep in touch. Even with you, Russell, and Ben, my two greatest enemies, we still keep in touch.
All right. Okay. I appreciate that. Because I am your enemy, and you want to spite me by intruding by yourself into my life, you should respond to the email from the other day.
I will. I wanted to tell you this. You will get a reply. I will suggest a date.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. It must have been an honor for you to talk to me. Thank you.
It's time right now for the David Feldman Show. He's talking politics and comedy too. He'll tell a dirty joke if you want him to. He's just a lefty from way back. He's a union man with an Emmy for writing. Someday he's mad and he feels like fighting. It's time right now for the David Feldman Show. To get your ears on right, buckle in real tight. He's got a lot to say and he's coming your way.
Thank you so much. Welcome back. You're listening to The David Feldman Show, davidfeldmanshow.com. Thank you, Slavoj Žižek, for coming on the show. And I want to thank Russell Spriglia, who made it possible. And the best way to thank everybody is by going to Orbo Books,